Military doctrine dictates that elite units survive through superior training. Panzer Lehr was built specifically for instructors. They were the finest tank crews in Germany. They were deployed to defend Western France. The assumption was that experience would counter material disadvantages. This assumption was incorrect. The American military had developed a different metric for warfare. It was not based on individual skill. It was based on synchronization. The doctrine was called time on target. It required every shell from every gun to arrive at the coordinate simultaneously. There would be no warning. There would be no adjustment period. The elite status of a unit became irrelevant when subjected to synchronized mathematical destruction. Experience cannot outmaneuver falling steel. It was a collision between human expertise and industrial execution. The human element failed. The illusion of superiority was about to be dismantled. July 25, 1944. The terrain just west of Saint-Lô was occupied by Panzer Lehr. Fritz Bayerlein commanded the formation. It was not a reserve division. It was not a hastily assembled brigade. It was the finest armored division available to the German military. They were chosen because they were the finest tank crews in Germany. They possessed combat experience. They understood armored maneuver warfare. They believed their expertise would dictate the pace of the coming battle. The men were positioned in the hedgerows. They awaited an anticipated ground assault. Their equipment was maintained. Their defensive lines were established. They sat directly in the impact zone of Operation Cobra. The American plan was brutal in its simplicity. It relied on a forward observer network embedded with frontline units. These observers utilized specialized optical rangefinders. They calculated coordinates with mathematical rigidity. They possessed a direct communication link to the artillery batteries. A request for battalion fire support could be transmitted, processed, and executed with unprecedented speed. The standard response time was minimal. A forward observer could call for fire and receive it within 3 minutes. 3 minutes. The German defensive doctrine accounted for artillery preparation. Standard engagements involved a ranging shot. A single shell would land. Corrections would be made. The target would seek cover during the adjustment phase. This was the established rhythm of combat. The men of Panzer Lehr understood this rhythm. They expected the familiar sequence of events: a spotter plane overhead, a distant thud, a ranging impact, the order to take cover, the subsequent barrage. This sequence was obsolete. The American batteries did not fire ranging shots. They calculated the trajectories. They synchronized the flight times. The guns were loaded. The coordinates were locked. The artillerymen adjusted the elevation dials. The firing lanyards were pulled. The sky remained empty. The ground remained quiet. The order was given. Post-action analysis reveals the mechanical precision of the time-on-target barrage. The methodology required disparate artillery batteries, stationed at varying distances, to fire at specific, staggered intervals. The shells traveled along different parabolic arcs. They converged on a single coordinate. Every shell from every gun arrived at the target simultaneously. The initial impact was not a single explosion. It was a unified wall of kinetic energy. The first round and the 20th round impacted within seconds of each other. There was no warning interval. There was no progressive buildup of sound that allowed soldiers to take cover. The acoustic physics of the battlefield were weaponized. The sound of incoming fire usually triggers a conditioned survival reflex. The time-on-target method bypassed this reflex entirely. The acoustic signature of the incoming ordnance was masked by the simultaneity of the strike. For a German infantryman caught in the open, the transition from silence to destruction had no middle stage. You were standing, then you were not. The mathematical synchronization removed the human reaction time from the equation. survival was no longer a matter of training. It was dictated by spatial positioning at the exact millisecond of impact. The elite instructors of Panzer Lehr possessed the highest tactical proficiency in the German army. Tactical proficiency requires time to implement. Time was the variable removed by the American artillery doctrine. The psychological impact of this method was documented in subsequent debriefings. The absence of a ranging shot shattered the anticipated rules of engagement. The mind processes sequential threats. It calculates risk based on escalating auditory and visual cues. When these cues are absent, cognitive processing fails. The environment shifts instantly from passive to lethal. The analytical reports emphasize this disruption. The target is neutralized not just physically, but structurally. Command and control networks are severed instantly. The ability to coordinate a defense is erased in the opening seconds. The artillery strikes were the precursor. The airspace above St. Lo filled with the primary ordnance delivery systems. The drone of the engines was a physical pressure before the first bomb fell. The sky was saturated with aluminum airframes. Exactly 1,500 heavy bombers approached the sector. They were supported by groups of medium bombers. The target area was defined. The men of Panzer Lehr occupied this space. The release mechanisms were engaged. The payload was deployed. Exactly 3,300 tons of high explosives were delivered. The concentration of ordnance was unprecedented. It was directed into a space smaller than a mid-sized American city. The bombardment altered the topography. The impact zone became a lunar landscape. The topsoil was vaporized. The underlying bedrock was exposed and shattered. Hedgerows were uprooted. Craters overlapped. The air pressure fluctuated violently. Dirt rained downward. Metal fragments severed branches. Shock waves compressed lungs. A thick layer of gray dust coated the steel hull of a Panther tank. The tracks were buried under displaced soil. The radio antenna vibrated continuously against the turret. Smoke obscured the sun. The temperature of the surrounding air increased. The smell of cordite replaced the scent of damp earth. The structural integrity of the defensive positions failed. Deep dugouts collapsed under the sustained concussive force. Foxholes became graves. The physical pressure of the explosions liquefied the soil. Equipment was rendered inoperable. The communication wires were shredded. The chain of command was physically disconnected. The bombardment did not target specific strongpoints. It targeted the grid square. The methodology was saturation. The objective was total material degradation. The men in the impact zone were subjected to continuous, overlapping blasts. The earth shook without pause. The sky was a continuous roar. The duration exceeded the structural limits of the field fortifications. It also exceeded the limits of the human nervous system. The historical record relies on the primary sources generated by the survivors. Fritz Bayerlein survived the bombardment. His documentation of the event provides a clinical assessment of the destruction. His account remains one of the most harrowing primary sources from the entire European campaign. He was a veteran commander. He had witnessed the destructive capacity of modern warfare. Yet his written words convey a sense of profound disbelief. The scale of the violence exceeded his established parameters of combat. The text is devoid of tactical optimism. It is a record of systematic annihilation. He described the aerial assault with industrial terminology. The bombers came as if on a conveyor belt. This phrasing indicates the mechanical, uninterrupted nature of the attack. Back and forth, the carpets were laid. The repetition of the bombing runs created a grid of devastation. Artillery positions were obliterated. Tanks were overturned and buried. Infantry positions were flattened. The verbs used in his report, obliterated, overturned, buried, flattened, reflect a passive state. The division did not engage the enemy. It was acted upon by the enemy. The elite status of the unit is notably absent from the post-action reports. The focus shifts entirely to the scale of the material loss. The four pillars of the American assault, heavy bombers, medium bombers, fighter bombers, and synchronized artillery, operated simultaneously. They operated at full intensity. The division was annihilated not by superior tanks. It was not destroyed by a special weapon. It was dismantled by the coordinated application of conventional munitions on an overwhelming scale. The reflection of the command staff highlights a critical failure in intelligence. The German defensive strategy anticipated a conventional assault. They prepared for an infantry advance supported by armor. They did not prepare to be erased from the map before the ground engagement began. The realization of this error was recorded in the casualty figures. The high explosives fractured the defensive lines. The secondary munitions were then deployed. Fighter bombers swept over the cratered landscape. They released 60,000 incendiary cluster munitions. The bomblets descended in dense patterns. They dispersed over the shattered terrain with lethal efficiency. The white phosphorus burned at temperatures that melted steel. The detonation of these devices ignited the remaining vegetation. The combat zone burned. The combat of concussive force and thermal weapons created an uninhabitable environment. The psychological toll manifested physically. The human brain cannot process sustained, multi-directional sensory overload. The elite training of the Panzer Lehr crews focused on tactical problem-solving under fire. There were no tactical problems to solve. There was only endurance. Endurance failed. Several of the men went clinically mad. They abandoned the relative safety of the collapsed dugouts. They ran into the open. They were cut down by shell fragments. They died. The breakdown of discipline within an instructor-grade unit indicates the severity of the trauma. The physiological response to continuous blast pressure includes auditory hemorrhage and spatial disorientation. Men bled from their ears. They lost the ability to navigate the familiar terrain. The command structure dissolved at the squad level. Officers could not issue orders over the noise. Subordinates could not execute orders in the firestorm. The heavy armor plating of the Panther tanks provided no defense against the vacuum created by the blasts. The engines choked on the particulate matter. The tracks snapped under the seismic shifts of the earth. The intersection of high explosives and incendiary devices eliminated the possibility of retreat. The division was pinned within the designated 12 square kilometers. The perimeter was sealed by the continuous artillery strikes. The interior was consumed by the cluster munitions. The elite tank crews were reduced to static targets. They were trapped in their vehicles. The vehicles became ovens. The bombardment ceased. The 90-minute allocation of time expired. The aircraft departed the sector. The artillery batteries halted their fire. The sudden absence of noise was absolute. The dust settled over the 7,000-yard front. The topography of Saint-Lô was unrecognizable. The hedgerows were gone. The roads were erased. The defensive network was a continuous field of craters. A thick haze hung close to the ground. Small fires burned in the shattered tree lines. The air was thick with pulverized limestone. The scent of vaporized metal lingered in the trenches. The silence was not peaceful. It was the acoustic signature of total destruction. Deep in a subterranean bunker, a single light bulb swayed on a wire. A hand reached out and carefully wiped the dust from the glass lens of a shattered periscope. The hand belonged to Fritz Bayerlein. The commander of Panzer Lehr surveyed his sector. The communication lines remained dead. The radio frequencies emitted only static. The anticipated counterattack orders were not issued. There was no one left to receive them. The survival of the command staff was an anomaly. The frontline battalions were unresponsive. The silence stretched into the late morning. It was a tactical void. The American ground forces had not yet advanced. The space between the two armies was empty. The map room in Paris remained insulated from the destruction. The generals moved wooden blocks across paper representations of the landscape. They believed the blocks still represented living men. The German command hierarchy, located miles behind the front, remained unaware of the ground reality. They monitored the maps. They noted the cessation of the bombardment. They assumed the defensive lines were damaged but intact. They expected Panzer Lehr to perform its designated function. They expected the elite formation to repel the impending infantry assault. The disparity between the map room and the battlefield was absolute. The silence on the ground was the evidence of the division's end. The official communication logs document the final collapse of the illusion. Field Marshal von Klug monitored the situation from Army Group Command. He analyzed the strategic maps. He calculated the necessary defensive postures. He transmitted an order to the front. He demanded that Bayerline hold the line. The order was standard military doctrine. It assumed the presence of a functional combat unit. It assumed that casualties could be replaced and lines could be reformed. The transmission was received in the ruined bunker. The response sent back by the Panzer Lehr commander is permanently recorded in the archives. Military historians still quote the transmission. It is the definitive statement of the unit's destruction. Bayerline replied to the field marshal, "Out in front, everyone is holding out. Everyone. My grenadiers, my engineers, my tank crews, they are all holding their ground. Not a single man is leaving his post. They are lying silent in their foxholes because they are dead." The words provided the terminal data point. The argument between doctrine and reality was concluded. The elite status of the division did not matter. The strategic imperatives of Army Group Command did not matter. The men were dead. The truth of the synchronized barrage was finally acknowledged at the highest levels of the German military. The delay in comprehension was fatal. The High Command operated on outdated assumptions. They believed a front line could only be broken by a massive infantry push. They could not conceptualize a front line being vaporized from the air. Information had been available. The scale of the aerial deployment was known. The capabilities of the American artillery were documented. The command structure simply failed to synthesize the data until the destruction was absolute. The tragic realization occurred only after the combat effectiveness of the unit reached zero. The illusion of superiority was buried in the craters of St. Lo. The statistics finalized the historical record. Over 70% of Panzer Lehr's effective strength was destroyed. This casualty rate was achieved before a single American infantryman crossed the start line. The ground assault was a secondary phase. The primary objective was accomplished by the synchronized application of explosive force. The legacy of the bombardment at St. Lo is defined by the mathematical precision of the time-on-target doctrine. It demonstrated that coordinated, simultaneous barrages could obliterate elite formations before evasive action could be taken. The German perspective shifted permanently on that morning. The terror was not found in the individual skill of the opposing soldiers. It was found in the invisible geometry of the artillery arcs and the relentless schedule of the bombers. The finest armored division available to defend Western France was not defeated in combat. It was systematically erased by a 3-minute response time and 90 minutes of falling steel. The era of the elite warrior was superseded by the era of the grid square.